Well, as we open it up for questions and answers, there are microphones there that you can stand at. I want to thank the panel. I'm proud that the experts on the panel here, the women, outnumber the men greatly. Let's give the organizers a round of applause for organizing that.
You noticed that we were the ones who stuck to the time limit.
Correct. The women did stick to the time limit. And they're much more organized, and they were here on time, and they exceed in all things. So, yes. I have a couple of questions that I'll pose to you until you others gather. I wanted to ask Dalia, how obviously the collective, the Muslim community in America is politically weak. In some situations, they're even seen as politically toxic. Some candidates don't even want to be seen in pictures, and that's even the Democrats. President Obama went to great length to distance himself from his Muslim roots, or having even on his website. Even Hillary Clinton used the smear, as some called it, that somehow the picture with President Obama putting on that turban circulating. That started with Hillary Clinton's campaign in 2008. Obviously, Islam continues to be used as this political football that's toxic. How much of it is Islamophobia rooted in the weakness, the political weakness of the Muslim community? Does that invite the Islamophobia and the racism? Does it fuel it? Politically strong groups that are even smaller in numbers in this country deter attacks. They don't stand it, whether it's the Jewish community or even the Hindu community. You don't see politicians going after them because they seem to have stronger political, collectively, they're stronger politically. Do you think that the Muslim community's political weakness invites this rise in Islamophobia and makes them an easy target?
So thank you for the question. I once
Mike?
heard, forgot. Okay.
Oh, you must have learned from other people's hot mic experiences.
Yes,
okay.
I want to keep that to a minimum. So I heard from Marshall Gams, who's if you're not familiar with him, he's an expert on organizing, on political movements. He actually was one of the strategists for the Obama 2008 campaign. And what he said was that groups, minority groups, marginalized communities, whoever, have never, ever gotten their rights by appealing to the majority as harmless. So as benign, as, you're scared of us, but we're really nothing to fear, so just relax. They were able to get their rights however much they were able to achieve through becoming organized, and a force that would where there would be some cost to going after them, some cost to marginalizing them, to demonizing them, to insulting them. And I think that two things are at play with the American Muslim community. One is that, yes, they are not politically, they have not reached their potential in political mobilization. It's getting better, but it definitely isn't where it needs to be. But there's also a paradigm shift that has to happen in the community, which the community, with very few exceptions, has spent 15 years trying to convince the public that they're harmless. They're just, and I think the community believes, wrongly, that people go after Muslims because they're genuinely, in their heart, scared of their Uber driver and 7-Eleven clerk, which is completely ridiculous. And I mean, a really easy way to illustrate that is Ahmed the clockmaker. Ahmed the clockmaker supposedly was handcuffed and arrested, and all this stuff happened to him, and humiliated in front of his classroom because his teacher genuinely in her heart thought his clock was a bomb. Well, I'm a parent of kids that go to a school in Fairfax County where there was an actual supposed bomb threat. So someone called in a bomb threat. And I saw what they do when there's an actual threat of a bomb in a school. And they evacuated the kids, they brought in a bomb squad, They had everything checked out, and they missed an entire day of school. None of that happened in the case of Ahmed with the clock. He was sitting handcuffed, humiliated in the principal's office with his so-called bomb sitting right next to him in the office with everybody around. So this was not fear. This was just bigotry. It was super simple. So the way to address bigotry is not by coddling it. It's not by accommodating it. It's not by playing into it and trying to make bigots feel more comfortable with you. It's by making it difficult to act on it in terms of policy and organization and political mobilizing.
Thank you for your comments. I think the audience agrees with you, even though they didn't clap, but I felt the agreement. We're not going to coddle the bigots. It's not like, somebody's bigoted and you're like, oh, Habibi, it's okay. I'm really a safe person. I get that. I wanted to ask you, Tamara, how much is Islamophobia rooted in imperial foreign policies? The neocons, are they using Islamophobia? Obviously, you have to dehumanize a population in order to bomb them, like the wars in Iraq. How much of it is actually rooted in this imperial policies to dominate the region or to control the resources there, as we've seen in these ongoing wars since 9/11 and even before? So your comments on that.
How much of Islamophobia is a function of or has been manufactured specifically to promote imperial projects? I think we'd have to go back to classical colonialism when we see that European... I should let Dr. Shelton respond to this. When we see that there are imperial motivations, obviously economic and power motivations for colonialism, and in the context of that, the people whose land is being usurped, whose resources are being taken, whose power structures, bureaucracies, they're very bureaucracies, are being absorbed by the foreign powers, there has to be some explanation for that. And so the explanation is that we're helping you, you see. We're helping you. You are unable to manage your own affairs properly. That's why we're so much stronger than you are, and we'll prove it to you by taking control of you. And then we shall exercise the burden that has been put upon us by the very fact that our skin is white and we're men. It's a burden we share, but somebody has to do it. And, or we shall civilize you, that's our mission. We shall civilize you because you are uncivilized. So we see even at the time that, for example, the end of the 19th century, when Britain was again trying to take control of Afghanistan, and it was a young Winston Churchill who was reporting on the events, and he explained that the reason the Afghans were fighting so viciously against the British effort to take control of their land wasn't that the British were fighting to take control of their land, but because they were Muslims. Because there's no more retrograde force on earth, were his words. No more retrograde force on earth exists than Islam. And that explains why the Afghans were fighting against British efforts to take control of their land. Otherwise, of course, they would have said, sure, no problem. A few years later, maybe the very next year, the same Winston Churchill was in Sudan, helping the British try to take control of Sudan. And again, the reason that the Sudanese were fighting so strenuously to resist British occupation wasn't that they wanted to resist British occupation, but they were Muslims, you see. It's Islam that makes them fight. Otherwise, they would have said, Ahlan wa sahlan. So this securitization is not a new phenomenon. It's a new name for it, but it's a dehumanization of the other for the sake of justifying whatever it is we plan to do. You know, there is that old euphemism that human beings are rational animals. We learned some time ago that we're not. We're rationalizing animals. We rationalize what we want to do. We just determine what we want to do, and then we figure out a way to achieve it. If it means dehumanizing the people whose resources and, in fact, often lives we're taking, so be it.
Thank you. Mubashara, if you can give us some tabshir, would that be? No, tafsir is like interpretation. Tafsir is like, you know, good news, I guess, which is unknown. You know, give us glad tidings, even though it's not. Anyway, it wasn't a funny joke, I guess. It had to be an Egyptian Arab, and there's not a lot of them here, just a few. دمكم تقيل يعني. So, as far as a lot of the reports that we've seen as far as who's funding Islamophobia in America, Fear Inc. 1, Fear Inc. 2, other initiatives you guys have done at the Bridge Initiative Research, has shown that a lot of the funders behind Islamophobia are these radical Zionist groups. People like Frank Gaffney. I mean, his number one issue is, you know, he's like to the right of Lieberman in, you know, Avigdor Lieberman in Israel. They have this kind of shared common denominator. People like, you know, even Horowitz for Front Page Magazine, which their correspondent happens to be all these events and is present here today. How is it that, is there a connection between the Israeli occupation of Palestine and the funding of Islamophobia projects here in America? Because no matter, for the majority, when I see all of them, Bridget Gabriel, Act for America, Frank Gaffney, Sebastian Gorka, even the ones now that are even on the alt-right seem to be pro-Zionist, which kind of, it's weird to be anti-Semitic and pro-Zionist at the same time. You want to support the state of Israel, but at the same time you're a white nationalist. But that's the one common denominator that I see with many of these groups. Have you guys seen this connection? Is it real that there is a connection between what's happening in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict to the rise of Islamophobia here in America?
So I would say there isn't necessarily a direct connection. A lot of them have affiliations with Zionist groups. One of my current research projects is on Robert Mercer. And I think this is very important in understanding who was behind Donald Trump, the funding behind him. Mercer is a billionaire hedge fund owner of a very secretive hedge fund, Renaissance Technologies, and he kind of bankrolled, you know, Trump's campaign. But not only Trump's campaign, he owns a big share of Breitbart. He owns a data analytics company called Cambridge Analytica. There's a lot of these other corporate organizations that are funding this administration, and they don't have, not that I've come in my research, connections to Israel or pro-Zionist movements. It seems to be that it's more of a corporate coup of anti-government deregulation from this aspect of people that are coming behind Trump administration. There is a Zionist element, but this direct connection, there isn't hard necessarily evidence of it. I would say with Mercer, his funding of, you know, Breitbart and all of these other chambers that are supporting Trump, they have a very anti-establishment policy, counterculture. We've come into this time, I think it was a huge response to Obama's election. In 2008, when Obama was elected, Jane Mayer did a great book called Dark Money. And in it, she talks about how post-Obama, after the election, a bunch of corporate groups, namely the Koch brothers, had a big meeting of what are we going to do? They were ultimately really, really upset because Obama was in office, mainly because they thought it was going to hurt their industries because of the regulations that Obama would put in place. Don't understand how that came to be because Obama, you know, supported bailing out the banks. So these groups, I think, were more so in response to homegrown issues in the U.S. of government infiltration, of, you know, or government regulation of this hyper-capitalism that we have. I think to point it necessarily just on Israel isn't doing a just cause. I think there's a lot of homegrown policies, specifically in our corporate industry.
Just to clarify, I wasn't saying that it's all because of Israel, but is there a connection? Because, I mean, before the rise of Trump, Frank Gaffney was operating, Daniel Pipes, Steve Emerson. I mean, the who's who in Islamophobia seem to all to be these dedicated, hardline Zionists. Is there some sort of connection in the past? I wasn't sure if there's any research to suggest that. I wasn't saying it's directly tied to Trump, but is that a factor that's been playing? I'm not sure, maybe.
Direct funding from the Israeli government?
No, not the Israeli government, but people that their number one issue is Israel. Because there are special interest groups that are focused solely on Israel. Is there just a coincidence that all these special interest groups that are focused on Israeli domination of the region or of Palestine, is it just a coincidence that they also happen to be people who are leading and peddling some of this Islamophobia? Frank Gaffney makes it very clear, and Daniel Pipes has been known to say that the rise of Muslim enfranchisement in the U.S. will lead to the end of the golden age for Jews in America. Recently he launched this Israeli Victory Caucus in Capitol Hill, and a big portion of that, again, is to push this Islamophobia narrative. So I thought, in my opinion, I'm not an expert and haven't done the research, but I always just thought that there's some sort of connection. Anyone else care to comment on this topic?
I think Mubashir's comments are very well taken. There is a much broader umbrella here. I think there is, a Venn diagram, there is the corporate umbrella. There are many sectors within that might find it, that might be useful to become vocal representatives. Robert Mercer doesn't go online. The Koch brothers keep low profiles. The mega money behind these corporate interests don't go public for the most part. Much too smart for that. Way smarter than we are, obviously. But there are a number of groups. Yes, of course, Islamophobic people who could be motivated by Zionism. But of course, there are huge sectors of the Zionist movement who aren't Islamophobic. So I think that it's dangerous to try to make too close a correlation. There are also smaller other sectors within that big umbrella. Generic, what do we call these? Survivalists, we have them. They don't, nativists, that kind of thing. There are all kinds of groups within it. So again, to focus too directly on Zionists or as a source of Islamophobia, I think can be misleading.
So one can be an extreme Zionist and not be Islamophobic.
Well, I'm not sure what you mean by extreme
Like
Zionist.
Avigdor Lieberman, kind of like Netanyahu. Those types of figures, those individuals, because they obviously are they represent the vanguard of Zionism. Can they be both very championing their Zionist cause at the same time be not Islamophobic?
I think, of course. Okay. I would never make an ad hominem argument because I don't know any of these people. I don't know what their positions are as individuals,
right.
Or personal positions are. But of course, someone can be a strong political Zionist and not have any grudge against Islam or Muslims. Obviously, Palestinians are not the same thing as Muslims.
Right. Oh, you're at the podium. Oh, we're out of time? Okay, well, let's give a big round of applause to our panelists.